You know what nobody wants to admit out loud? Right now, there are millions of men sitting in total silence, while someone they love is tearing them apart over something that happened years ago. Not cheating, not betrayal, not anything huge. A forgotten text, a misunderstood look, a moment of human imperfection that's been turned into a permanent indictment of their character. They're not being confronted with facts, they're being buried under feelings. You never care. You always do this. If I mattered, you just know. And he sits there, heart pounding, trying to replay the last week, the last month, the last year, wondering, what did I actually do wrong? He tries to answer logically, calmly, carefully. But logic doesn't land. Facts don't matter. The conversation keeps slipping away from what actually happened into how she felt about how she thinks it happened. By the time it's over, he's apologizing for 10 different things he didn't even realize he was accused of. Not because he's guilty, because he's exhausted. That's the part nobody wants to talk about. Men aren't walking away from women because they suddenly hate love or fear intimacy. They're walking away because they're tired of living in a permanent emotional trial where they're always the defendant and the sentence is always the same. You're not enough. Imagine this. You try to fix something in the relationship. You notice money is tight, stress is up, the tension is growing. So you sit down like an adult and say, hey, we need to talk about our spending. Let's look at the numbers together. You think you're starting a responsible conversation. She feels attacked. Suddenly, it's not about numbers. It's about how you made her feel. Her voice cracks, tears start. She says you're making her feel like a failure, like she's not good enough, like you only see her mistakes. Now you're no longer talking about a budget. Now you're apologizing for making her cry, while the money problem stays exactly where it was. One guy told me he tried to talk about finances with his partner for over a year. Every single time he brought up the topic, the same pattern played out. He'd show the bills, she'd break down, he'd comfort her, the conversation would end unresolved. By the time he finally woke up, they were drowning in debt. He was calling himself a terrible provider, while she was making every financial decision without taking any responsibility for the outcome. This is what a lot of men are quietly waking up to. In too many relationships, clarity has been replaced with emotional chaos. You try to talk about a specific problem. The topic shifts 5 times. Past, present, assumptions, feelings, fear, old wounds, all thrown into one blender and poured onto your head. You say, let's stick to this one thing. You're told, you're minimizing my feelings. You say, that's not what I meant. You're told, you're gaslighting me. You say, can we talk calmly? You're told, now you're policing my emotions. So what do? You stop trying. You stop bringing up issues. You stop asking uncomfortable questions. You stop setting boundaries. Not because you don't see the problems, but because you've learned that every attempt to fix them gets turned into an attack on your character. The scariest part, a lot of this is invisible from the outside. From the outside, it looks like she's emotional and he's distant. From the outside, it looks like she's expressing herself and he's shutting down. From the outside, it looks like she's fighting for the relationship and he's withdrawing. But that's not what's really happening. What's actually happening is this. He spent years realizing that every time he opens his mouth, he loses. If he speaks honestly, it's harsh. If he speaks carefully, it's cold. If he disagrees, it's disrespectful. If he has needs, it's selfish. And slowly, the calculation in his head changes. At first, he thinks, maybe I just need to communicate better. So he reads the books, watches the videos, tries all the I feel statements and active listening tricks. Then he thinks, maybe I just need to be more patient. So he gives more chances, swallows more frustration, ignores more red flags. Then he thinks, maybe it's my fault. Maybe I really am toxic. So he apologizes for things he's not even sure he did just to make the storm stop. And then one day, something snaps. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. He's in the middle of yet another argument about something small that turned into something huge. Being told he never listens, while replaying in his mind how many times he actually listened and changed and tried. And for the first time, instead of thinking, how do I fix this? He thinks, why am I still here? That's the moment everything changes. Because once a man asks that question honestly, he can't unask it. He can't go back to pretending he doesn't see the double standards. He can't unfeel the permanent anxiety of walking on eggshells in his own home. He can't unknow how peaceful his life feels on the rare days when there isn't a fight. Most men don't leave because of one big betrayal. They leave because of 1,000 small cuts. The night she turned a simple sentence into a character assassination. The day his bad mood wasn't allowed, but hers became everyone's emergency. The moment he realized her feelings were always on trial and his were always inadmissible evidence. And when he finally steps back and looks at the bigger picture, he sees something truly brutal. He's not a partner, he's an emotional employee. His job is to regulate her mood, absorb her stress, carry her fears, validate every feeling, predict every trigger, apologize for every misunderstanding, while stuffing his own emotions down into a locked basement inside his chest. If he fails at that job, he's cold. He's emotionally unavailable. He doesn't know how to love. But if she fails at empathy, accountability, or self-control, she's just overwhelmed. She has anxiety. She's been through a lot. It's not that men never mess up. Of course they do. It's that in too many modern relationships, male imperfection is treated as proof of unworthiness, while female imperfection is treated as something everyone else must endlessly accommodate. So when you hear men say, "I'm done," understand this. They didn't arrive there overnight. They arrived there after years of being told that their reality doesn't matter, their emotions are dangerous, and their only acceptable role is to absorb blame and keep performing. They're not quitting because they're weak. They're quitting because the deal they were given looks less and less like love and more like a lifetime contract to be the villain in someone else's story. Here's the part almost no man admits out loud. There comes a moment when the relationship stops feeling like a partnership and starts feeling like a psychological obstacle course designed to exhaust him. It doesn't happen suddenly. It happens piece by piece. At first, it's small things. She gets irritated at your tone. You apologize. She says you didn't notice something she hinted at. You apologize. She accuses you of being distant because you didn't read her mind that day. You apologize. And after enough of this, you begin to notice a pattern. You're wrong before the conversation even starts. Not because you made a mistake, but because the role assigned to you is the one who needs fixing. Men talk about this privately, in gym locker rooms, in late-night group chats, in the car after leaving a fight they didn't understand. One guy told me something chilling. I realized I was being judged for sins I never committed and blamed for thoughts I never had. That's the new reality for a lot of men. Think about how many guys live in a home where their own emotions are treated like threats. She can cry, scream, collapse emotionally. That's expression. But if he raises his voice 10%, he's dangerous. He's too intense. He needs therapy. She can unload every frustration on him because she's overwhelmed. But when he has a bad day,
he's told he's bringing negativity into the relationship. You see the double standard. Her emotional reactions are explanations. His emotional reactions are accusations. And here's the part that breaks men the most. She doesn't even have to be right. She just has to feel like she is. A woman can say, "I feel like you don't love me anymore." And now he's forced to defend himself against an invisible crime. How do you disprove a feeling? How do you argue with something rooted in emotion instead of reality? You can't. That's the trap. Because the accusation doesn't come from fact, it comes from fear. And fear can't be reasoned with. I worked with a man whose wife suddenly accused him of cheating because she felt something was off. No evidence, no suspicious behavior, no messages, no calls, nothing. Just that feeling. She cried, screamed, tore through his phone, demanded explanations, demanded apologies, demanded reassurance. He showed her everything. He opened every app, he scrolled through every message, he sat there for hours proving his innocence.
But here's the twisted part. Once she felt betrayed, she treated her imagination like fact. For months afterward, she brought it up. "You broke my trust. I can't believe you'd do that to me. I know you felt something for someone else." He didn't. But logic can't compete with emotion. He lost sleep, lost confidence, lost himself, trying to counter a story she invented in her own head. And the worst part? He started to believe that maybe he did something wrong, just because he couldn't make her feelings go away. Another man told me something even darker. His girlfriend threw a ceramic mug at the wall during a fight, shattered it, pieces everywhere. He raised his voice, not screaming, not threatening, just raised it enough to say, "Stop. This is too much." She froze, looked at him with wide eyes, picked up her phone. "You're scaring me." He wasn't drunk. He wasn't violent. He wasn't even moving toward her. But the moment she said she felt threatened, the story became reality. And who do you think the police listened to when they arrived? Not the man covered in small cuts from a shattered mug. Not the man who didn't touch her. They listened to the one crying. Because emotion beats evidence. Every single time. He slept in his car that night, not because he was guilty, but because her fear was treated as fact, and his truth was treated as irrelevant. And this is where so many men finally break. They realize they're living in a system where their intentions don't matter, their feelings don't matter, and their reality doesn't matter. Where a woman's emotion can rewrite the past, distort the present, and predict the future. And everyone around them will take her side before he even speaks. Society keeps telling men to open up, be vulnerable, share your feelings. But the moment they do, those same feelings get turned against them. Share your fear, you're weak. Share your anger, you're toxic. Share your stress, you're unstable. Share your boundaries, you're controlling. So what do men do? They shut down. They stop sharing. They protect their peace in silence. Not because they don't feel, but because every time they show emotion, it becomes ammunition. And here's the irony most people refuse to see. Men aren't walking away from women for fun. They're walking away because in too many modern relationships, peace is only possible when the man sacrifices himself. And eventually, they realize they're done sacrificing. They're done being the emotional punching bag. They're done being guilty until proven innocent. They're done walking on eggshells in their own home. They're done being responsible for someone else's happiness while theirs is ignored. Little by little, the switch flips. Not with anger, not with hatred, with clarity. And once that clarity hits a man's mind, it's over. Not the relationship, his willingness to continue suffering for it.
Here's the truth almost nobody has the courage to say out loud. Men aren't giving up on women. Men are waking up from a system that taught them their value only exists when they're sacrificing themselves. For decades, guys were told that being a good man meant absorbing pain, staying calm, carrying the emotional load, fixing every problem, swallowing every insult, and never expecting anything back. They were taught that their worth comes from how much they can endure. But something is shifting, something massive, something unstoppable. Men are realizing that endurance is not love, it's self-abandonment. And once a man sees that clearly, there's no going back. One guy told me something that still hits me every time I think about it. He said, "I didn't leave because she changed. I left because she didn't. And I finally realized I wasn't allowed to." Read that again. He could grow, improve, work on himself, evolve. But she could stay exactly the same and still tell him he wasn't doing enough. He was in the gym, getting healthier. She said he was obsessed. He started reading about communication to be a better partner. She said he was trying too hard. He started setting boundaries for the first time in years. She said he was becoming controlling. He went to therapy to unpack his own stress. She said he should be focusing more on her feelings. No matter what he did, the relationship stayed the same because all the responsibility for improvement sat on his shoulders alone. And that's when he understood something life-changing. It wasn't a partnership, it was a performance. He was performing the good man, performing emotional stability, performing strength, performing patience. And the moment the performance slipped, even a little, the criticism came like a tidal wave. He wasn't allowed to be human, only useful. Another man described it even more painfully. He said, "Being single is the loneliest freedom, but being with her was the loneliest prison." That's the emotional reality a lot of men quietly live with. They're not escaping women, they're escaping cages built out of double standards, guilt, emotional chaos, and blame. But here's the plot twist. When men finally walk away, something incredible happens. They start to breathe again. The anxiety fades. The constant self-monitoring disappears. The tension in their shoulders melts. Their sleep improves. Their mind clears. Suddenly, they're not walking on eggshells anymore. They're walking in peace. One guy said, "I spent years terrified she'd leave, and when she finally did, I realized the fear was worse than the reality." Men aren't finding happiness alone because they don't want connection. They're finding happiness alone because for the first time in years, they feel safe. Safe from accusations, safe from emotional traps, safe from manipulation disguised as communication, safe from having to defend their existence every week. Safety. That's the word nobody associates with men, but it's exactly what they're missing. And here's the part that terrifies society the most. A man who realizes he doesn't need a relationship becomes impossible to control. When a man chooses himself, his peace, his freedom, his growth, his time, his boundaries, you can't guilt him, shame him, or manipulate him back into chaos. He's seen the other side. He's felt what it's like to live without constant conflict. He's tasted life without criticism. He's experienced days without fear of emotional explosions. And when he compares that calmness to what he had before, the answer becomes brutally simple. The chaos isn't worth the companionship. The demands aren't worth the connection. The pressure isn't worth the presence. Peace wins every time. That's why this moment in history is so powerful. Men aren't retreating, they're awakening. They're not anti-relationship, they're anti-self-destruction. They're not bitter, they're finally done being blamed for everything that goes wrong. They're not cold, they're finally warm toward themselves. This is the first generation of men who can say, I would rather build my life alone than lose myself with someone who refuses to meet me halfway. They're choosing freedom over fear, growth over guilt, clarity over confusion, respect over resentment, and peace over performance. And here's the twist. Men walking away isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning. The beginning of a world where men finally understand their value, where they don't need permission to feel, where they're allowed to say no, where they're allowed to choose themselves, where they don't have to shrink to be loved, where they don't have to break to be accepted. So when people ask, why are so many men done with women? The real answer is simple. They're not done with women. They're done with pain. They're done with manipulation. They're done with emotional danger. They're done with losing themselves to save relationships that never saved them. They're not quitting love. They're finally loving themselves.